Good evening, then, my dear audience. Professor Rajan, Dr. Rohit. I think you all can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Great. I can also hear you all very clearly. First of all, thank you so much for everyone who's taken the time out to be with us today. I can see the list of attendees increasing by the minute or by the second rather. And we are just looking to have a very invigorating discussion today. Here today, in collaboration with Inspirus Education as well as of Oro University, and we've got two amazing speakers here. And let's discuss and figure out how things are for higher education in India today. And we'll take these. And so please, may I request the audience also to type in any sort of questions that they might have, and we'll try to discuss those questions, of course. And if any question does remain unanswered, we will make sure that we'll write to you directly, or we'll call you up and then provide you with all the necessary answers that you have. So once again, good evening everyone. For the ones who've just joined in, today we have two eminent personalities of higher education, Dr. Rajan Velukar and Dr. Rohit Singh. Before I do a little bit of introduction of them, I would like to tell us why we are all here today. But before I do that, let me just tell you who this person is that I'm speaking so much and initially. So I'm Abhinav Gugoi. I am the Vice President of a company called as organization called as Inspirus Education. We are a test prep, coaching, and a counseling company who helps students to achieve their dreams of getting into the best universities across India and across the world. So we are very boutique. We have offices in Mumbai, and we've opened an office now in Guwahati, in the northeast. So we are really looking forward to bringing as much awareness about the best universities of the world to the northeast. So, having said that, we are about 22 years old. So we have been in this area, in this higher education segment for a long period of time. Having said all of that, today's session's objectives are about how the Indian higher education system is looking forward post COVID-19. Naturally, it has tremendously affected all of our lives, and to the best of our abilities, the universities, especially public and private, will play a huge role in defining what the new generation of scholars would be like. And therefore we are here today talking to these two eminent personalities. Firstly, just to give a brief introduction to Dr. Rajan Velukar, who has about 34 years of experience. That is more than I'm aged and in the Indian higher education system, and just reading it off, it's quite tremendous actually. As a teacher, development leader, quality innovator, I haven't heard that in a long time. Technology adopter, administrator, as well as a policy advisor. I mean, he's held lots of positions over the course of his wonderful career as vice chancellors, directors, secretarial positions in the government, Asia-wide officer roles, memberships of numerous committees, associations, and bodies all across the globe. And presently, he is the vice chancellor of Oro University, who's collaborating with us today. And he has also worked as the VC of Mumbai University, among many others in the Mumbai region. He's also worked on various important committees of National Knowledge Commission, the UGC, National Assessment and Accreditation Council, FTII, central government, state government, and I think it can go on and on. I think I can just speak on, and they will never get his time to speak as if I keep going on about his CV. But we'll let him hear from him very soon. But before that, let me just introduce to you briefly Dr. Rohit also, who is a professor and presently now the Dean of Academics at Oro University, who has also about 17 years of experience in Indian higher ed. He's an expert in the area of marketing, advertising, and branding, and he loves to train students and has worked with leading management institutes such as the IITs and the IIMs, as well as the Government of India, conducting MDPs for Ministry of MSME. So, we have two wonderful gentlemen here with us today, and we are going to, or rather, I'm going to try and pick their brains as to what they find interesting about public as well as private universities. So, may I just give the mic forward to Dr. Velukar here first, and then to Dr. Rohit about, just briefly tell us about who you are. What makes Dr. Rajan Velukar tick, in real life today and tomorrow.
Hi everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So hi everyone, and it is very nice to meet you today virtually. I hope to meet you soon in my university. I'm sure you are taking care of yourself at your home. Of course, I have spent 34 years in education. So, and now also I am spending more time in talking to people, interacting with intellectuals, government, and other people regarding post-COVID situation in higher education, which I think we will be interacting through questions and answers.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Rohit, can we also have your mic? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Abhinav, for having us on this panel. And thank you very much for getting our university on its platform, helping people to understand what we are trying to do. Just to brief the audience that myself working into the field of academics from the last 20 years into the higher education system. Started the career with the Constituent College of the University of Allahabad, then moving towards the private universities. There were opportunities for me to move into the central and the state universities, but at some point of time, I find that there is a very good possibility where the private institutions can play a dominant role in reforming the education system in India. And that is how I am glued to the private system in India till now. I never thought of going back to the state of the central government, because the kind of opportunity which we get to bring the possibility of changes into the curriculum, the pedagogy, the learning and teaching process, that really gives us immense opportunity for the betterment of the teaching community as a whole. So looking forward for the session, and let me know where we can give our valuable input.
That's diving deep into the questions itself today. So we are here to actually discuss about public universities and compare them a little bit with private universities, and how we want to see and pick your brains and see how these two types of universities in India are doing things differently right now, and will do things differently in the near future post-COVID. So Dr. Velukar, I think will be to give us an insight as to what will be the scenario in the Indian higher ed from all your conversation you've had with government officials, of course, with other university officials, with the education ministry. So what is the scenario that you predict or you see in the Indian higher education post COVID-19? Where are we?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? I could not hear you properly.
Right. I'm asking what will be the scenario of the Indian higher education post COVID-19? I'm sure you've had multiple discussions with, let's say, the education ministry, with other ministries across the universities, public and private both, as well as multiple different players that are part and parcel of the Indian higher education system. So where are we heading? What are we looking at?
Post COVID-19, I would rather say that Indian higher education is having more opportunities than yesterday.
Okay.
Because of this pandemic came across the globe. I'm not just talking about India, but across the globe, every educational institution got an opportunity to be resilient, to be flexible, to work under pressure, to innovate, so that the teaching learning processes becomes better. And therefore, if I tell you that during last 2 months at least, in India, all the teachers have gone on a different mode which they have not earlier done. And now they are learning that. Now this online learning, which they never did, now they have started doing it. And not only doing it, but they have started innovating. How do we engage students? That is number one. And therefore, I look at it as an opportunity rather than a threat. Number two, the universities have started talking about health and hygiene. Now, I have worked in public institution and private university also. And now the difference which I see in the thinking of all the vice chancellors and educational heads has really changed. Now they have started thinking about health and hygiene. How do we take the care and safety of these young people? How do we bring flexibility? This is the thought process which I see in this country when I am interacting with. Even the government is coming out with some flexible norms for higher education. The research funding, now people are coming forward to do research in science, to fund for the research. And these are the positive changes which I see. Of course, there are challenges which were there earlier also. We were talking earlier also. But therefore, the young people now must be very alert while choosing the education institutions. And they must ask 5 questions, to which I say 5 C's are important from your point of view for your future life. Now, what are those 5 C's? One is curriculum. Very, very important. You should see whether the university which is offering a particular program, is there any flexibility in the curriculum? Is that curriculum is futurist? Whether it is going to useful to you or not? What are the options they are giving? What is the reputation of the university? And whether they are providing experiential learning, which is called as real world example. The second C is campus. What kind of campus experience a particular institute is going to give? And there are so many things in that. The third is community. What kind of community is coming to your university? Whether I will be able to connect to that community or not. Fourth is career. Very, very important. And of course, the last C is cost. If you look at these 5 C's, then the public institutions are slow in responding to any change. My experience, because I worked in public institution as a vice chancellor for 10 years. And when I worked in a private university prior to this, Oro, I have seen there is a difference in the speed of responding to the change. In public institution, they respond slowly, whereas the private institutions, because they have flexibility, they have freedom, they have autonomy, they respond fast. That is what to your question I would like to say.
Right. So Dr. Rohit, we will come to you definitely. But before that, I want to pick Dr. Veluka's brains a little bit more. I mean, we are in the diaspora of Indian universities which are in the public sector, whether you call the Mumbai University or Delhi University or Kolkata University. We have many more public universities than private universities in our country. Now, how will technology be adapted in these online classes in public universities? I mean, they are trying. And I know even Professor Nayan Ranjan Sinha here from the audience have also questioned that sometimes it's very difficult for public universities to maintain their website even. So how are we looking for technology to come into the idea of online classes for public universities?
Let me just tell you that the public institutions also, because of this COVID, have started responding. But as I have said, that they are slow because of the structures which they have, which I also had in University of Mumbai. Now the government is coming forward to help these universities. But let me tell you, as there are good universities in the public sector, there are as well bad universities. Same is the case with the private universities. Now in the public university, I must tell you that barring 10% of the public universities, they will really find it very difficult to adopt the new technology, because it takes time, because there is a tendering process and several other things, and therefore they will take time. But at least because of this COVID-19, the universities have started creating a virtual facilities in their university. Their issue is different because they have many affiliated colleges which are there in tribal areas, which are there in rural areas, where this the network and the bandwidth, and it is a question of bandwidth and it is a question of network. So, but they are coming out with this. It may take little time, but then they have started working in it. But they must focus in every decision which they are going to take in academic council, board of studies or examination. They need to integrate technology, and there are hundreds of platforms. Even I must tell you that the Oro University, which is going to use the technology, say in rural areas, if there is no internet, even then with this, without internet, you can reach through the technology. You need to update yourself what kind of technologies are coming in the market.
Right. Wonderful. Dr. Rohit, I think let's hear from you also. I mean, you've connected with a lot of public as well as private universities, naturally, from having extensive 17 years of work. So where do you see technology coming into the public university sector? You know, what kind of technologies should be adapted, and how should somebody in a rural region of India, you know, where internet is very slow, you know, there's no 4G internet, some are still living with 2G and 3G internet. So for students such as those, how does technology help, you know, through the public university sector?
So Abhinav, if I need to answer this, basically if you see where the challenge lies, and the challenge is whether the universities which are working in the public domain do have an adequate IT infrastructure support to face these kind of scenario like COVID-19. Giving the example of our university, from the day one when we established in 2011, and our focus was to provide an integral and transformational learning to the students, which will help them to have a holistic development. From day one, we thought how to bring IT support into our teaching and learning pedagogy. What we have done on the day one is we created our in-house learning management system, which we have implemented for all across the teachers, the staff and the students to work through that virtual learning environment which we have created in-house. So as a teacher, if I'm going into the class, it is my responsibility to put the lectures onto that learning environment system where the student can even access from the remote areas or from a distant location if he or she has missed the class. COVID-19 has come in 2019, November, December, you know. We were prepared from 2011, number one. Number two, when universities have to decide upon the kind of IT infrastructure they need to provide, as Sir has already mentioned, one of the important C's, which is cost. So immediately that cost benefit analysis starts coming into picture without looking into the immense amount of benefits which the universities are going to get by putting this cost into place through this infrastructure. So the cost input is really high. The benefits is not visible immediately. That is the first resistance which comes from the management or from the members of the university, that why we need to invest so much money when we are already having a live face-to-face classroom. Right. And till day people are debating whether the face-to-face classroom interaction is good or it is online. I support the view that in the coming years and days, it is going to be the blended mode of learning, which is going to play a dominant role into this teaching and learning process, whether it is a public university or a private university. Private university have an edge over the public universities, as sir has rightly said. We can take a decision on an immediate need-to-need basis. Right. We just need to put an approval in front of the board, and it doesn't go to the Senate and all those procedures where it takes 6 months before it gets an approval done. So it may hardly within a week we can get an approval done, and it is same with all the private universities. Point is, what is your intent of putting that IT support into place? Whether it is merely a facility, or you are going to look at it as an opportunity, providing a tool for enhanced learning for the students, providing an opportunity as a tool for the faculty members to explore the possibility not within the students of the university, but also providing the online learning classrooms to the people who could not come to the university also. That is the second objective. And third is, you can also integrate this teaching learning process with the industry without bringing industry into the university system as such. So if you see all these three basic objectives, I feel private universities are having an edge over the public university in this sense. Second point of view is, when you are going to put this change into place of bringing online classroom into process, blended learning more into process, creating a learning management system, the responsibility lies on the faculty member. It is not on the university system as such. Okay. So faculty members have to take more responsibility of blending their process of teaching and learning with that IT support which the university is providing. So if someone asks me, is this a university which is responsible for not bringing IT into the place? I will also say, no, it is not only university system and the management, it is also faculty members who have to become more proactive of bringing these IT support into their teaching and learning process. So I feel faculty members have to play a very active role. They need to make a request to the university, whether it is public or private, that yes, it is a need of the hour and we need to move out of the four walls of the classroom to increase and enhance the learning experience given to the students and to the community.
Right. I think that...
Abhinav,
yes,
I would like to take 3 seconds. Since last 1.5 months, I am alone at home. I don't have the laptop, or I don't have the computer. I don't have the iPad. I am on only mobile, active on mobile.
Right.
So the future is mobile. Everyone will have.
True. So I think there are 3 very important takeaways from the last conversation of about the last 15 minutes. Of course, time is of essence. Things that can be updated quicker is always the way to look forward. Secondly, costing, of course, is a big issue. Third, as you said, everything has to move out of the classroom and into the virtual world. And so these 3 are very important takeaways. But I think Dr. Rohit also brought up a very important point, which Dr. Valuka can probably give us more insight into, which is the idea of professional development of professors and teachers within India, in public and private universities. So how much is done in public universities in terms of professional development? How much impetus is given? I mean, from your experience of working with the public university, maybe you could give us an insight into that, because that is something that students must understand and know before choosing universities.
I was part of the discussion since the year 2003 about the faculty development. Earlier, the University Grants Commission, they established the teachers training institutes in many universities, region-wise. And then they was supposed to give the training to teachers about what is the future in their own subject, what kind of teaching learning processes they need to bring.
Right.
But over a period of time, we had seen that they did not perform, barring few institutions, those who were organizing orientation and refresher programs. And therefore, now the government has came out with a scheme recently, in last 2 years, that the human resources are very, very important. And therefore, they have established some centers. And through those centers, they have started giving online training to the teachers about what kind of pedagogy which you will need, what kind of resources which you will need. So those kind of institutions, centers have been established by the government of India through University Grants Commission. And now many more such orientation program, refresher program and orientation program of developing the faculty is being organized. But I don't say that they have achieved what was the objective behind it. Now the basic objective of this is whether you are able to engage these young people or not, whether online or in the classroom, whether you can bring innovation into it, whether you can involve them, and whether you can empower them. The objective is very big. But if you ask me with a scale from 1 to 5, now still we are in the scale of 1, which is the lowest. Now we need to bring dynamism and vibrancy in online learning, because just coming on the net and just delivering a lecture will not solve the purpose. Whether the person who's sitting in the class, whether he is engaged or not, whether he is enjoying or not. And for that we need to learn a very different kind of pedagogy, which is done in UK, USA, Australia, where they have centers of teaching, centers of excellence in teaching learning. So we need to establish those kinds of centers of excellence in teaching and learning. And only through online this is not going to happen. And teachers' demand is it has to be blended. Something we can learn online and something exactly face to face. And but a start has happened. And number is very big. To train more than 4 lakh teachers in the country is a very difficult task. But they have started.
Yeah. So starting is the first step naturally. I mean, I personally know, because I'm living in Assam right now in Guwahati, and I'm working closely with the Assam government also in terms of secondary education and school education, where actually a lot of teachers in the vernacular medium schools, they are conducting classes through WhatsApp. I mean, of course, it's just giving homework, doing the assignment, like a flipped classroom. But it is happening. People are trying to use technology as much as possible. And of course, different segments of our population have different access to different kinds of technology. So we'll obviously have to look at that more in depth. Actually, not we, but rather the higher ed, the government of India has to look at that more in depth, naturally. But since we've been talking about UGC, there's Saurav who has put up a question, and I will just read up what he said. He says that I do have a criticism. There are many candidates who are professionally qualified, like being a chartered accountant, company secretary, cost accountant, etc. Still, they are ineligible for the recruitment of assistant professor as per UGC norms, merely because they do not have a MCOM degree. Do you believe that such UGC norms are outdated and need to be revised? Please give your opinion.
Yeah. So the first answer is yes, they need to be revised. I was a Vice Chancellor in University of Mumbai, and let me tell you that out of 100% teachers, those who are teaching accountancy to BCom and MCom, out of them 75% are chartered accountants.
Okay.
Why that has happened? Because University of Mumbai took a decision to appoint chartered accountants only, and therefore there are more number of chartered accountants. But the University Grants Commission, there is a pressure on University Grants Commission to revise their guidelines. The chartered accountants examination is much tougher than the MCom examination. And therefore I am of the opinion, and I have expressed this opinion on the platform on which I should. I have done that. Now the chartered accountants and the Vice Chancellor needs to come out and then pressurize the University Grants Commission. But let me tell you, now there is a positive thinking in the apex bodies. AICT has said you can bring 20% of the practitioners as a teacher.
Oh, wow,
it is a good step.
Yeah.
So this will happen. Now people have started thinking that we need to bring professor of practice. Okay. And chartered accountant is a practitioner because everything is experiential learning. And therefore we talk about integrating experiential learning into the curriculum so that students learn better than what they learn only in theories. Now the curriculum, the teaching learning process is, the classes are not happening in the classroom, but the learning is happening only in the laboratories. So laboratory has become a class. So the concepts are changing. As I have said that in the public institutions, even in the government, change is slow. But there are positive thinking which is happening. So let us pressurize them more and we may get the result.
What do you think? I think this is a question open to both Dr. Rohit and Dr. Velukar. Do you think because private universities such as Oro or so many others, they are doing very, very well, like Siv Nadar, for example, or Upi Jindal, for example, or Asuka, for example, along with Oro and all of you are doing so well. Do you think the public universities are also feeling the pressure to actually bring up their sort of curriculum, bring up their standard of teaching, bring up their standard of ways to teach?
Yeah, so Abhinav, I would like to start with the question which was asked that can chartered accountants be appointed as teachers in the, and sir has rightly said that they have already done in the Mumbai University. I put it other way. There is always a provision to bring industry experts and professionals into the classroom teaching and learning process. And universities are not being asked not to bring them into. So it is dependent upon the willingness of the universities. Each university which is there, I don't know for which university Mr. Saurabh is asking question for, but in general, if the universities feel that they need to bring the professionals into the classroom teaching and learning process, universities are free to do it. And as I said, that we can bring as many visiting faculties as possible to give that enhanced learning experience to the students from professionals. So my take is, if the university willingness is there, nobody can stop the university. Number two, to your question, which you were saying that keeping the private universities which are coming up into the existence now, it is putting a pressure on the public system, public universities pertaining to the kind of work which the private universities are doing in the short span of time. I go back to the same answer that the intent of getting into a higher education system also plays a very dominant role in enhancing the quality of the education system which an institution is trying to create. If your intent is right, the content and the outcome will definitely be in the right path. So the universities which you have taken example as, you see in the short span of time, now they are standing and giving competition or a thought event to the public universities to see what new they are doing that the students are getting attracted to these universities. And at all the universities, we have a backing of the group Oro Hotels, which is giving the practical training to the students in the United States of America, which is totally a paid training. And students can easily earn some amount of money while they are into the part of the curriculum. Now, these kind of changes which the private universities are bringing will definitely play a role in the mindset of the students as well as the parents. That do they really want to send their students to the public universities where curriculum has still not been revised in the last 4 years? Or they really want to send the students in the private universities where they are giving the real-time knowledge to the students based on the industry professional experts who are coming into the classroom teaching learning process at the same point of time. If you see the industry, if you see the private universities pattern, they have a mentorship program in collaboration with the industry experts and the professionals. So it is not as a teachers we are going into the classroom and guiding students about their career aspiration. It is industry experts who are also coming into the picture and telling them what is happening as on real-time basis in the industry, so that you need to enhance your skills, knowledge, aptitude as per the requirement of the industry. Otherwise, what happens, the students then goes out of the campus finishing the courses, then only they come to know. So these kind of real-time changes we are bringing into our curriculum, which is at the end of the day creating a conscious choice and decision among the mind of the students that yes, they are compelled to think towards the good private university.
Right. So since we are in this discussion, I mean, Dr. Velukar rightly put those 5 C's forward, but let's deep dive a little bit into the last C, which is the cost. We do have a sort of an idea where private universities tend to cost much more than public universities. I personally believe, of course, education should be looked at as a return of investment naturally, but then that is not the case for everybody. Cannot afford a private education, whether it's in school, whether it's in universities. So what are universities such as Oro doing? Do you have scholarships, financial aids, or I know some universities do have scholarships and all of that, private universities, to make studies possible for students with low-income backgrounds. But public universities, we know that they are much sort of friendly on the pocket than private universities. So how do you balance this out? I think it's a tough question, but it'll be lovely to hear your insights on this.
Sir, shall I give the answer and then you will add on to it, or you?
Yeah, you give the answer and then I'll add on.
Okay, fine. Abhinav, what I would like to put it over here is, if you see the financial structure of the government institutions or the public universities, they are being funded by the state or the central government.
True.
The money is being pumped into the universities by the central or the state government, and therefore the education system is subsidized. And as a parent, neither you, neither I will ask a question why the classroom is dirty because we are paying only a nominal amount of fees.
Yeah.
So the counter question will only come when you are charging something for it,
Yeah.
As against this, private universities, they have to manage from their own resources. Now, there are 2 kinds of funds which the private universities are putting into. One is the endowment fund, which is being created by the parent institution, which is funding the university. For example, in our case, it is the Oro Hotels, which is providing us the fund for running the Oro University. Okay. One source is that. Second source is the amount of fees which we are charging. I would love to invite you post-lockdown to come and see the university. The amount of fees which we are charging is not only in terms of giving the quality education to the students, but also the kind of facilities which we are giving to the students, which is not comparable with many universities. Coming to the second point, at our university, a merit-based student is never having is never going to miss a chance to get an education at our university. You recommend me 200 students who are scoring more than 95%, we will give them free admission.
Oh, okay.
As simple as that. I'm putting it like this. You give me you please record it, and you please tell your associates. We are providing merit scholarship to all the students who are securing more than 70% marks into their class 12 or into their graduation for PG programs. This is one kind of scholarship, which is called merit-based scholarship. Second, we have need-based scholarship.
Okay.
We provide 100% financial assistance to the students who are coming from the economically challenged backgrounds, but they are meritorious. So if Abhinav recommends me a candidate and says, sir, this is a candidate who has scored 85% marks in class 12 from Guwahati in Assam Valley School, but recently he has lost his father, he is not able to pay the fees, we will give them free education. So that we categorize in terms of need-based scholarship.
Okay.
So at our university, we are providing 2 kinds of scholarship. One is the merit and another is the need-based. And need-based is given to the economically challenged students. For your information, we started in 2011 with 42 students. Today we are having 1,250 students. Okay. The amount of scholarship we have given to the students annually is more than 1.5 CR.
Okay.
And till date, if you want me numbers, till date we have given free tuition, free education, 100%. When I say 100%, it is not only tuition fees, it is hostel, food and everything.
Okay.
That has been given to at least 50 students. Wow. And till date, we have given to at least 1,100 students merit-based scholarship. And if I ask you to calculate into the average fees which you are charging, which is around 1 lakh rupees per year, you see the amount.
Right.
So what I said initially was, it is the intent with which we are working into the higher education system.
Right.
We are not running onto the business model which many are thinking of it. It is not. So the two kind of sources which we are having is one coming from the endowment fund, other coming from the regular fees. Out of these two, we are giving these kind of scholarships. So this is my take on the scholarship and the opportunities for the meritorious student. Over to Professor Velukar.
Yeah, thank you, Rohit. And Abhinav, this is a question which everyone asks, and they should ask. Means I must thank them for asking this question. And then Rohit has said the exercise which I did in 2001 in the state of Maharashtra, because I was working on one of the committees to find out what is the actual expenditure on every student if he or she is doing a BCom degree or a BA degree or any other degree.
Right.
And that time the fees was just 800 rupees in public institution.
Okay.
So when we did the actual calculation, the per student expenditure at that time on a BCom degree was 12,000 rupees.
Okay.
So the student was getting a subsidy of 11,200 rupees. So somebody was paying for his education. Okay. Now what is happening because of this, and what has happened in over a long period of time, because government's funds are shrinking. Now you will find there are many posts of teachers are vacant in public institutions.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are many posts vacant in public institutions, then who's going to teach these young people? So there are a number of questions which we need to ask. But when we are looking at the cost and ROI, which you have asked, return on investment, very important. Students are looking for that also. Very, very important. So I'll tell you, return on investment, whether the question which you should ask yourself is whether return on investment you are looking for short-term period or long-term period. Now, if you are looking for a long-term period, then you should look at the quality. Quality education. Whichever institute, public or private, whichever institute is giving you a quality education, even if you have to spend more money today, in the longer term of your life, you will grow better. And that is the research. I am telling you the research across the world. But you should follow your passion. But today you are saving some money. Like if you are buying something from China, that will not last for a longer time. But you are buying something from Germany, that will last long. Say the car, people say you must buy car from Germany and not from China.
True.
In education also, and education is much more than buying a car or buying something. So when you are assessing this, you will have to assess from a very different perspective.
Right.
And that perspective is of quality education.
Right.
Rather than how much you are paying. And the secondly is about the scholarship. In Oro University, we have debated and discussed a lot, even last month, about the scholarships. And we have came out with several schemes of this.
Right.
Because of this COVID-19.
Right.
And
I think
the only thing is merit. If you are in merit, you will get this scholarship.
Actually, that brings up to the next sort of segment, because and this is something that I as a counselor, as with Assam Valley School or with other schools that I work with across India, and of course with Inspirus Education, this always comes up. As in, when you define quality education, what are the criteria that a student must look at in terms of choosing that university? Of course, we talk about faculty, no doubt. We talk about the curriculum or the type of courses that is offered, no doubt. A lot of people say look at the placements of that university. What are the other things that you can add to this tree, or among these three, which do you think is the most important?
Yes, Rohit, if you want to add, then.
Okay, fine.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, Abhinav, the very first question is that parent or a student asks about the things which they have not seen.
Exactly.
Not seen or they have not experienced. I could not say not seen. They may have seen the website, they may have seen the poster, but they have not experienced it. So, in education system, it is much of the word of mouth which goes into the market. Number one. Number two, assessing the parameter of quality itself is very subjective element. The element of service for you may be different as it is for me at some point of time. But in education, there are 3-4 very common factors. One is what kind of education which the institution is giving to my child. And you have rightly said, in higher education, it is always related to the teaching learning process, number one. Number two is what kind of internship opportunities which my son or daughter is going to get.
True.
And third is what is the placement opportunity if he or she is enrolled into the course which is leading him or her into a professional market. Now, these are the three basic parameters on which you try to assess. My take is it is much more beyond that.
Okay.
My take is, for example, at Auro University, in a day we have only 2 classes. Now, this is the news for you.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. And each class is for 2 hours. So, for example, if you are a student of BBA, so you are going to study only marketing or you are going to study only business mathematics, not all 6 subjects in a day. Now, what is the pedagogical tool we are doing? We call it 20-30-50 ratio. 20% of the learning of the students happens when he listens to it. 30% of the learning happens when he sees something to it. And 50% of the learning happens when he get involved into doing something. Yeah. So it is the involvement of the head, the heart and the hand into the teaching learning process that you cannot do in 45 minutes. So therefore, each class is being for 2 hours. First hour is for that listening and seeing, and the next hour is for doing. So we have project, we have simulation exercise, we have industry mentors coming into classroom, we have a live projects happening into the business organization or to the villages or to the cities where the student go and study it and prepare a report and come back to the class and make a presentation. Now these things cannot be measured immediately till the time my 3-year student goes out in the market at 10 people, this is what I was doing. Then comes the question of what kind of internship opportunities you are providing during the semester. So in the first year of the students, we say we have a social internship opportunities where the student has to go and work into an NGO or a business organization which is working for the community. Second year, we have internship opportunities in any business organization. And third year, we have an opportunity for their specialization. And when I say specialization, if a student is studying into hospitality management and he wants to work in a hotel, we provide that opportunity. Okay. So this also gives a great learning opportunity for the students, which at some point of time, we as a teacher are not able to bring into the classroom. So we embed this learning process by incorporating the industry, the community, the society, the people who are working in the professional field and bring them into the process of teaching and learning. We also have a program called Industry Immersion, where we encourage students to at least go and work in the industry or a business organization for minimum of 1 month leading to 6 months, depending upon the choice of the student. And this is again beyond that 4 hours of classroom which I was telling you, 2 hour. Okay. Then we also have those expert and distinguished lecture coming into the classroom. And then we have around 25 international collaborations where the student get an opportunity for studying a semester abroad into the foreign universities, and the study which they are doing into foreign universities, that will be incorporated into our semester process, means we will incorporate that credit into our curriculum process also.
Right.
So these are the kind of opportunity which we are providing during the semesters. It is not that once they complete or they wait for their 3 years to complete. Yeah. So this is the enhanced opportunity which we are providing to the student. That is how we are different from any.
Yeah. So when choosing universities, you have to look at so many different criteria. Then a student must, a family must, besides the cost, besides the placement, besides it's the potential to excel. I think that's
exactly
to that picture.
Or providing an opportunity for excelling.
Yes. Yeah. So let's look at it from the university perspective, and I think we have only about 10 minutes, so we will finish up with a couple of more questions, and there are a couple of questions that are coming from the audience also. So I'll ask those. But before that, let's look at it from the university perspective.
Yeah.
What kind of students are you looking at? Because in the public universities, a lot of it is highly dependent on marks, right? Because a lot of the admissions open only after exams are done, only after results are done. In Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, it doesn't matter. If you get a 95%, and there's some crazy cutoffs that we keep hearing about. So you need to get literally 100% in an ISC board exam or CBSE board exam in order to go into some colleges in, let's say, Delhi University, right? And we've seen this across public universities. No doubt this is the population idea, but how should public universities deal with this situation, and what does also private universities such as you, because you on the other hand have a very comprehensive application process, where you do maybe an entrance exam. A lot of private universities do. Besides that, you look at the class 10 marks, also 11 marks, also class 12 marks also. You also look at the CV, what the other students have done besides or out of the classroom, so all of these factors come in. And so where is the balance? How do you equate that? How does which direction should the public universities go to, and which direction should the private universities go to, so that it all becomes standardized? Will this ever be possible?
Abhinav,
yes,
I don't think this is possible in the entire world. Yeah. Even if you go to the US, there are private universities, and there are they call it as land grant universities.
Yeah, state universities.
Yeah. You go anywhere. You go in Australia. You go in UK. It's very different. It's a very different, and therefore, see, one has a survival instinct. Other has less survival instinct. Those who are dependent on the government grants, they have less survival instinct. Because they know anyway this is going to happen. But those who are private universities, they have a survival instinct. And because of this survival instinct, they have to innovate differently. They have to do it very differently than the public institutions. So that is the most important thing. And therefore that standardization is not going to happen. In fact, if you ask me a question, this standardization has killed innovation. So, in education, we should not think of standardization. What is the most important thing, Abhinav, I must tell you, is whether any institute, public or private, whether they are giving me a holistic experience or not. Not from the books only. That is only, anyway, I am going to learn the discipline. That will be taught to me in a classroom. But I am not only interested in that, because I have to live my life when I am going to come out of an education institution. And therefore, my question is about my future. And my future is dependent on holistic development of mind. Which education institution is going to give me that kind of experience? Say, there is a triangle. One is academic rigor, whether that academic rigor is there or not. Second is whether the skills required for my living is required or not. So that is the second thing. And the third is emotional well-being and emotional intelligence. Whether the care of these three things is taken together or not, with the flexibility, because now we are talking about personalized learning.
Yeah.
And therefore every education institutions, whether public or private, they will have to see whether I am giving a personalized experience to that particular child. That is what we are trying to do in our university. Also. And therefore the standardization should not happen anyway. Only the standardization should happen is of giving holistic experience.
Right.
That standardization should happen.
But that is very nicely put, actually. However, the case of the matter in reality, I'm not arguing against your viewpoint. I believe the same way as you have also. But the general idea among parents is that if you don't bring in the marks, you will not get into a good university. So for universities, is academia only the criterion or one of the most important criterion to get in? Because of which, students feel so pressured to do well in exams.
That is changing, Abhinav. That is really, really changing. If you look at the ISB, Indian School of Business, which is doing much better than the IIMs.
Yeah, true.
The selection is not based on only marks.
Mm-hmm.
In the management education institutions, even if you get a better marks in the CET,
mm-hmm.
but there is a group discussion.
Yeah.
And there is an interview.
Yes.
So you may get more marks in the theory, but you get less marks in the group discussion.
Right.
All the admissions in the Western world
mm-hmm.
is not based on only your marks.
No.
That is minimum. You should get first class or something. I will just give an example of my own daughter. She studied in Mumbai University. And she used to, someday, she used to sit at home only and don't go to a college. So then as a parent, I asked her, why are you not going to a college? Why are you not attending? I am not going to give you any concession for attendance. Because if I give you, I will have to give it to others.
Yeah.
Then she was asking me a question, why should I go and sit in a class?
Mm-hmm.
I could not give answer to her. She said, if a teacher is teaching me what I know, how will I get interested in sitting? But when she had gone for a advanced postgraduate diploma, which is level 12,
mm-hmm.
in one of the institute, which was not recognized by AICTE,
mm-hmm.
there was no examination and there was no selection on the basis of marks.
Okay.
But the entire evaluation was done on the basis of reflection.
Mm-hmm.
No end-term examination. Every day they had to write reflection, and every week the professors used to come from Harvard, Stanford and Ashoka University and other universities and from industries. They used to assess them, evaluate them on Saturday. 5 days teaching, 6 day evaluation. That's it. No mark sheet. And she has got a job without appearing in any interview because the kind of certificate she has got. Nowhere the marks are written. Now it is changing, my dear friends. More than marks. What matters is whether you are able to reflect in your life, and that reflection doesn't reflect in your marks.
Right.
We will have to go beyond that.
Right.
And therefore just minimum 60% marks or in a good institute. And then you have to show your skills. Say in cricket, what happens? I am sure we must be having 500 best of the best cricket players in our country of same level.
True.
And somebody is taken in 11, but if he doesn't show a performance, he is out. Skills are important.
Right. So I think to summarize as a whole, I think we are moving towards a world in higher ed, in profession, in life generally, where development of skills has become more important than acquiring knowledge, right? Because if you have developed your skills, then any knowledge can be acquired at any point of time through any medium. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, knowledge is the minimum entry point.
Yes.
Later it is a different world.
Yeah. So skills are the way to go forward. So I think I will read up 2 questions that have come in from the audience. first is, so post lockdown, the synergies will be enhanced offline and online, professionals and academicians, conventional degrees and certifications. What are synergies should we as academicians look out for? And I think similarly, Saurav had also asked another question regarding UGC has come out with a notification where PhD is compulsory for faculty to be recruited in universities, whether it applies to private or public universities.
Yeah, the University Grants Commission's regulation about the PhDs in the universities is compulsory for all the universities which are recognized by University Grants Commission.
Okay.
There is no other way. And it benefits students, because when I am doing research, I know much more than a person who has not done research, because I know that what is latest in my own subject, because I am transferring that knowledge to students.
Right.
And therefore that is a compulsory condition. If UGC has said, it is compulsory.
Right. I think we've nearly come to the end, so I would let you, both Dr. Rohit and Dr. Velukar, to basically give us maybe 1-2 takeaways each, because we have a very mixed audience today among students. We have professors, we have teachers, we have principals also in our midst. So how about Dr. Velukar, you give us a takeaway for, let's say, professors and faculty, while Dr. Rohit, may I request you to give us a takeaway for the students, from the conversation that we've had today.
Yeah, Rohit?
Yes, sir. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Abhinav, from the point of view of the students, I will give 2 takeaways, one-liners. Sometimes degree in A4 sheet is more important than degree for life.
Right, I agree.
And second is, you need to learn more than what you are being taught. So the onus lies on the students. Teachers will become a facilitator in the process of journey of lifelong learning. So at every point of time, you need to find a teacher who will help you into those learning process.
Yeah. And I totally resonate with what Dr. Rohit has said, because as a counselor, as a teacher also, I believe that, you have to put yourself in situations where you learn by doing rather than learn for the sake of learning, So please keep up with that. Dr. Velukar?
Yeah. So I agree with Professor Rohit. And in addition to that, let me just add one more thing. You must develop one skill which will be useful to you in your entire life, and that is intellectual alertness. Okay. You will have to be alert throughout your life. And therefore, everything which you are doing in your life, whether studies or any other thing, reflect on that every day. The moment you reflect on that every day, your life will be different. Number 1. Number 2, whatever you are doing, you should do to follow or pursue your passion. Don't listen to anybody, because passion will give you happiness, and passion will give you your tool for earning also. And for that, be focused to follow or pursue your passion. Even if you take these 2 things, I am sure you will be successful in your life.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Velukar. I think the theme of the day is that follow your passion and don't look anywhere left, right, or at the back. Just keep moving ahead. And I think that applies to everybody, whether at whatever phase you are at your life, whether you're a 16-year-old, 18-year-old, or a 37, 38-year-old professional, or even a 60-year-old almost retiring professional. So
I am 60 years old and I am lifelong learner.
Same here, lifelong learner. Always looking forward to that. So at the very end, let me also thank Garima, let me thank Sivendra, and let me thank Yash from Inspirus Education, who has been the background support for us three coming on live today and talking to all of you wonderful people who've taken the time and opportunity and made the effort to log in and listen to us speak, listen to Dr. Velukar speak, listen to Dr. Rohit speak, and listen to me speak. So thank you very much, Shivendra, and yes, thank you Oro University also. I'm still looking forward to visiting that. I think it's been long overdue. And really, I think it's a wonderful initiative that has been started in Surat, and we really look forward to getting more and more brilliant students coming out from there and sending you also a lot of brilliant students. I'm Abhinav Gogoi once again, and I'm part of Inspirers Education, where we are part and parcel of counseling. We do test prep, we do coaching, and we are boutique in that way. We've just opened in Guwahati. And last but not least, I have to thank Dr. Rohit and Dr. Velukar for giving their valuable time and speaking their minds without any hesitancy. And to just finish off the whole event today, I would let Dr. Rohit first address, and then to finish off, I'd let Dr. Velukar to say the last words. Dr. Rohit? I believe he signed off. So Dr. Velukar, I think it's all for you.
Yeah, Rohit is here. Rohit?
Yes, sir. Sorry, got disconnected. Yeah.
No, sir.
Yeah. So you have to just say something in a very short
remarks, Dr. Rohit.
I didn't get you. Please, Abhinav, again. Sorry.
Just concluding remarks.
Okay, fine. So my concluding remarks, especially if the parents and the students are there, this is a very challenging time, but at the same point of time, it has given a lot of opportunity for us to reflect upon what actually we need in terms of the learning possibilities. And my suggestion is we all need to be making a choice which is done from the head and heart, but it should be also a conscious choice, an informed choice based on whether the plan which you have in your mind is really a perfect fit in terms of the requirement which you are looking towards into the education system. And I would suggest all the students to please have a career plan with them ready, so that they know exactly where they are moving and whether they are moving into the right system or not. Right. Thank you so much, Abhinav. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rohit, once again from the bottom of my heart. Dr. Velukar, to finish off.
Yeah, Abhinav, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to meet such a wonderful people, such a wonderful audience. So thank you very much. And I must also thank the principals and the professors, those who are present in this webinar. And at the same time, my dearest young student aspirant, those who want to pursue their career in whichever university they would like to. As a Vice Chancellor, let me just invite you to Oro University once. Whether you take admission or not, that is a different story. But I would like to invite you to the university to have a cup of tea or a coffee with me, whatever you like. And also, I would have loved to meet all of you. But some other day, I would love to come there and then meet. I really, really love the Northeast part of this country. I visited several times and I love them very much, that part also. So we'll come sometime and then meet all of you. And you too come to our campus and have a cup of tea or coffee with, or whatever you like. Please do come. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. The feedback form, we will definitely create one and send to you after all the email addresses. Everything is also recorded, so we will put it up on our pages of Inspirers and Oro. And lastly, once again, thank you, Dr. Velukar. Thank you, Dr. Rohit. Thank you, Team Oro. And thank you, Team Inspirers.
Thank you, Abhinav, and your team. Thank you so much.
Thank you.